You see that cucumber vine climbing your fence right now? The one with the big green leaves and maybe two sad little cucumbers hiding underneath? That vine is holding back on you. It can give you 5 times what it's giving you now, and it wants to. My grandfather could pull 40, 50 cucumbers off a single plant in one summer, enough to fill the cellar with pickles that lasted till spring. We have done it this way for generations, without a single bottle of anything bought from a store. And the folks who sell those bottles, the big garden brands, the bloom boosters, the miracle powders, they have no reason on this earth to tell you what my people already knew. Stay with me, because right around the middle, I'll show you the exact $1 trick my grandfather used to rescue a stalled out vine in July and get it pumping out cucumbers again in under 2 weeks. Before we go further, do me a small favor and drop your state or your growing zone down in the comments, because the timing on all of this shifts depending on where you're sitting. I still remember standing barefoot in the dirt on our farm in Lancaster County, watching my grandfather run his thumb along a cucumber leaf, telling me the plant was talking to us if we'd only learn to listen. Now, here's the first thing nobody tells you, and it's the thing that decides everything else. A cucumber is almost nothing but water. If you weighed one on a scale and dried every drop of moisture out of it, you'd be left with almost nothing in your hand. The scientists who measured it found a cucumber is about 96% water. Think about what that means. When you ask a vine to make 40 cucumbers, you are really asking it to move an enormous amount of water up out of the ground, through that skinny green stem, and into the fruit. If the water isn't there, steady and constant, the plant does the only sensible thing it can do. It quits. It drops its little cucumbers while they're still the size of your thumb, or it makes them bitter and hooked and hollow. Most folks water their cucumbers all wrong, and it isn't their fault. They come out with the hose, give everything a good soaking on Saturday, and figure they've done right by the plant. Then Tuesday comes hot and dry and that vine is gasping. Wednesday it rains buckets and the roots are drowning. Up and down, feast and famine, all week long. A cucumber vine hates that more than almost anything. It is not a camel. It cannot store up water for the dry days. What it wants is the same steady drink every single day, the way a spring seeps water into a creek bed, whether it rained or not. My grandfather never owned a drip line or a timer or any of the fancy watering gadgets they sell now for good money. What he had was an old clay flower pot, the plain reddish-brown kind, unglazed, rough to the touch. He'd take one that had a crack or a chip, plug the hole in the bottom with a flat stone and a little wad of clay, and bury it right down in the cucumber bed with just the rim sticking up above the soil. Then he'd fill it with water and lay a scrap of board over the top to keep the bugs out. That was it. That was the whole contraption. Here's the beautiful part, and here's the science the English are only now writing up in their studies. Unglazed clay is not truly solid. It's full of tiny pores, little holes far too small for your eye to see. Water seeps through those pores slow and steady, but only as fast as the surrounding dirt is dry enough to pull it. When the soil around the pot is moist, the water stays put. When the soil dries out, it draws the water through the clay wall right to the thirsty roots. The plant, in a manner of speaking, drinks exactly what it needs and not a drop more. Researchers who studied these buried clay pots, they call them ollas, found they can cut your water use by better than half while giving the plant more even moisture than any sprinkler ever could. Half the water and better cucumbers. My people were doing this before anyone thought to measure it. You can do this yourself this weekend for almost nothing. A plain terracotta pot from the back shelf of any hardware store runs $1 or $2, and you likely have a cracked one sitting in your shed already. Bury one pot for every 2 or 3 cucumber plants. Fill it every couple of days in the heat of summer, and check it with your finger, an inch or 2 down into the soil, to see how fast it's drinking. Cool morning air on the water, roots getting a steady sip all day long, no more feast and famine. And that right there is the knowledge my grandfather carried his whole life, the kind that never came in a bottle and never cost more than a moment's attention. If this way of thinking speaks to you, I want to mention that we've gathered the deepest of these old methods into a field guide called the Complete Garden Field Edition. It brings together the garden blueprint with old-fashioned pest cures that cost pennies, and the harvest blueprint, which covers Amish soil and storage secrets for bigger yields, all in one volume for $97. Everything is linked in the description below, and it reads like a neighbor talking, not a label on a bag. It's the kitchen table knowledge written down so it doesn't get lost again. But now let's get back to what's really going on inside that vine, because the other 4% is where the whole fight is won or lost. Because I told you a cucumber is 96% water, and that's true, but it's the other 4% that starts the real trouble. That 4% is where the whole fight is won or lost, and it's where the garden industry has been quietly picking your pocket for 50 years. Look close at your cucumber leaves. Not the little new ones at the tip, but the big older ones down toward the base of the vine. If they've started going pale between the veins, yellowing in patches, while the veins themselves stay green, your plant is trying to tell you something. Most folks see that and reach for a bag of general fertilizer, the kind with the big bright numbers on the front, and they dump it on and wait. Sometimes it helps a little, often it does nothing. And they never understand why, because the store never told them what that yellow leaf actually means. That yellowing between the veins is very often a hunger for magnesium. Now, magnesium is not some exotic thing. It sits right at the center of the plant's green color, the chlorophyll, the very stuff a leaf uses to catch sunlight and turn it into sugar and, eventually, into cucumbers. Without enough magnesium, the leaf can't hold its green, can't catch the light, can't feed the fruit. And here's the trick. The fertilizer companies would rather you never sort out. A general fertilizer heavy on nitrogen actually makes a magnesium shortage worse. All that nitrogen tells the plant to grow big and leafy and lush, and all those new leaves need more magnesium, and now you've got a great big hungry vine with pale leaves and hardly any cucumbers on it. You bought the problem in a bag and thought it was a cure. My grandmother kept a box of Epsom salt on the shelf in the wash house. Plain magnesium sulfate, that's all Epsom salt is, magnesium and sulfur bound together, and both of those are food to a cucumber. She used it for soaking tired feet, and she used it in the garden, and it cost pennies. When a vine went pale on us, she'd mix about 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt into a gallon of water, stir it till it dissolved clean, and pour it right around the base of the plants. Once every 3 or 4 weeks through the growing season, no more than that. You can also put it in a spray bottle, that same 1 tablespoon to the gallon, and mist it right onto the leaves in the cool of the evening. The leaf drinks the magnesium straight in, faster than the roots can pull it from the soil. Within a week or 10 days, you'll see that green come flooding back into the pale leaves. Now, I want to be honest with you, the way a neighbor should be, because there's plenty of foolishness talked about Epsom salt out there. It is not a magic cure-all. It will not fix a plant that's short on nitrogen or starved for water. If your soil already has plenty of magnesium, and some soils do, dumping more on won't help and could even throw things off. So don't go crazy with it. Epsom salt is the answer to one specific problem, that yellowing between green veins, and when that's the trouble, it works beautifully for almost no money at all. The garden centers sell a dozen fancy products that are magnesium underneath a pretty label and a price 10 times higher. Same magnesium, same plant, different price tag. That's the whole game. So we've got the water steady and the leaves green and feeding, and you might think that's the battle won. It isn't. Because a healthy green vine can still refuse to give you cucumbers. And this is the part that drives folks half mad. They've got a plant 6 feet long, leaves like dinner plates, yellow flowers everywhere, and not one cucumber setting on. They start blaming themselves, blaming the seed, blaming the weather. 9 times out of 10, it's none of that. And once I explain what's really happening, you'll never panic over it again. A cucumber vine, most of the common kinds anyway, makes 2 different flowers. It makes male flowers and it makes female flowers on the same plant. The male flowers come first, usually a week or 10 days before the females, and they come in bunches on skinny little stems. They never make a cucumber. Their only job is to make pollen. So a fellow looks at his vine covered in yellow flowers with nothing forming behind them, and he thinks his plant is broken, when really it's just a young plant doing exactly what nature built it to do. The female flowers come a little later, and you can tell them apart easy once you know the trick. A female flower has a tiny cucumber already formed at its base, right behind the petals, a little green swelling no bigger than a grain of rice. The male flower has nothing there, just a plain, thin stem. Once those female flowers open, they need to be pollinated, and this is where a lot of good vines fail, in a quiet way nobody notices. That little cucumber at the base of the female flower will only grow into a full cucumber if pollen gets carried from a male flower into it. Out in the open, the bees do that work, moving flower to flower all morning. But if the bees are scarce, and in a lot of yards these days they surely are, that female flower goes unpollinated, the little cucumber behind it turns yellow, shrivels, and drops off. You blame yourself again. It wasn't you. There just weren't enough bees. My father taught me to do the bees' work myself on the mornings they didn't show, and it takes about 2 minutes. You find a fresh male flower, the ones on the thin stems with no cucumber behind them. You pick it, peel back, or tear off the petals so you've got just the little pollen-covered center sticking out, and you gently dab that center right into the middle of each open female flower, the ones with the tiny cucumber at the base. One male flower has enough pollen for 2 or 3 females. Do this in the morning when the flowers are freshly open, because by afternoon they start to close and the window is past. It feels almost too simple, standing there brushing one flower into another, but that's how the fruit gets set. That's how you turn empty flowers into a full basket. Now, if you've stuck with me this far, this is the part I promised you back at the start, the $1 rescue my grandfather used on a stalled vine in the heat of July, and it ties everything together. Come the middle of summer, a cucumber vine that's been producing hard often just stops. The leaves are green enough, the water's fine, but the cucumbers quit coming. What's happened is the plant has gotten discouraged, in a way. See, a cucumber vine has one goal in all the world, and it isn't to feed you. Its goal is to make seeds so it can make the next generation. Every cucumber is really just a package for seeds. And here's the thing folks don't understand. The moment you let one cucumber stay on that vine long enough to grow big and fat and start hardening its seeds inside, the plant believes its work is done. It has succeeded. It made a mature seed pod, and it will slow way down or stop making new flowers altogether because in its mind, why keep working when the job's finished? So the $1 trick, the rescue, costs you nothing but the price of a coffee, if you want to call it that. And it's this: pick everything. Go out to that stalled vine and strip off every single cucumber, even the small ones, even the ones you'd normally leave to grow bigger, and pay special attention to any big, fat, overgrown one hiding down in the leaves, because that one, that oversized cucumber turning pale yellow, is the very thing telling the whole plant to quit. Get it off there. Once you've stripped the vine clean, give it that Epsom salt drink we talked about, 1 tablespoon in a gallon of water, and keep the clay pot full. Within about 10 days to 2 weeks, that plant, believing it has failed to make a lasting seed, will throw itself into a fresh burst of flowers and set a whole new round of cucumbers. My grandfather called it tricking the vine, and he'd do it 2 or 3 times across a season to keep a plant producing right up until the frost. The garden stores would love to sell you a bottle to do this. All it takes is your 2 hands and knowing to look for that one fat cucumber, and that right there is the deepest secret of all, the thing that turns a plant that gives you a handful into a plant that gives you a basket every few days. You must pick constantly, not once a week, every single day or every other day at the outside during the height of the season. A cucumber can go from the right size to too big in just a day or 2 in hot weather, and the second it gets past its prime, it starts sending that signal to the rest of the plant to slow down. Folks who pick once a week are quietly telling their vine to stop, and they never know it. Pick early, pick often, pick them a little smaller than you think you should. The more you take, the more the plant scrambles to make, because it's still desperate to get one to seed. You are locked in a friendly little argument with the vine, and as long as you keep winning, it keeps producing. That's not a product you can buy. That's just knowing how the plant thinks. Now, maybe you're sitting there saying, that's all fine for somebody starting a fresh garden bed in the spring, but my cucumbers are already in the ground, already halfway up the trellis, and some of this feels too late for me this year. I want to speak straight to you for a minute, because you are not too late, not by a long shot. And there are things you can do this very weekend to an established, growing vine that will change the rest of your summer. First, the picking and the flower dabbing I just told you about work on any vine at any stage. You can walk out this evening and start pollinating by hand and stripping off the overgrown cucumbers, and you'll see results in under 2 weeks. You don't need to start over. You don't need a single new thing. But here's a second one, just for the established vine, and it's about the leaves. By midsummer, the bottom of your cucumber plant is usually a mess. Old leaves gone yellow and mildewed and shading the soil, doing nothing but feeding disease. Go in with a clean pair of scissors or just pinch with your fingers and take off the lowest 6 to 12 inches of leaves right at the base of the main stem. It feels wrong, cutting off leaves, but those old bottom leaves have stopped earning their keep. They're not catching much light down there in the shade, and they're the first place powdery mildew takes hold, that gray-white dust you see coating the leaves late in the season. Clearing them opens up airflow around the base, lets the sun and wind dry the plant after a rain, and the vine puts its energy into the young, productive leaves up top instead of babying the old sick ones down below. And while you're dealing with mildew on an established plant, here's another thing from my grandmother's wash house that costs almost nothing and beats the fancy fungicides. Plain milk. Ordinary milk, mixed about 1 part milk to 2 parts water, sprayed on the leaves in the morning sun. It sounds like an old wives' tale, I know, but the researchers went and tested it, and they found the proteins in milk react with sunlight to create conditions that mildew simply cannot survive in. It works as a preventive better than a cure, so start early, once a week, before the mildew takes over. A splash of milk you already have in the icebox against a bottle of chemical fungicide that costs $15 or $20 and comes with a page of warnings. My people never bought the bottle. We didn't need to. There's one more thing for the established garden, and it costs you nothing but a look at the ground: mulch. If the soil around your cucumbers is bare, you are losing water to the sun every hour of the day, and you're inviting every weed for a mile to move in and steal what your vine needs. My grandfather laid down a thick blanket of straw, 3 or 4 inches deep, all around the base of every cucumber hill. Grass clippings work, dried leaves work, even a few layers of plain newspaper under some straw work fine. That mulch keeps the soil cool and steadily moist, which is exactly what our water-loving cucumber craves, and it keeps the fruit up off the bare dirt so it doesn't rot on the underside. You can do this in 20 minutes this weekend with material you'd otherwise throw away, and it works whether your plant went in the ground in May or you're reading this in the thick of July. So now let's talk about the 4% again, that little bit of a cucumber that isn't water, because there's one more piece to feeding this plant, right? And it's the piece that separates a good gardener from a great one. Everybody knows plants need feeding. What almost nobody understands is that a cucumber's needs change completely as the season goes on, and the fertilizer industry sells you 1 bag for the whole summer, because 1 bag is easier to sell. Early on, when your plant is young and small and just starting to climb, it wants nitrogen, the growth food, to build a good frame of stems and leaves. That's the time a little nitrogen does real good. But the moment that plant starts flowering and setting fruit, its needs flip right around. Now it doesn't want to grow more leaves. Now it wants to make cucumbers. And for that, it craves potassium above all else. Potassium is the mineral that runs the plumbing inside the plant that moves water and sugar into the swelling fruit that makes a cucumber firm and full and heavy instead of thin and misshapen. If you keep pouring high nitrogen fertilizer on a flowering cucumber, you get exactly what I described before, a giant leafy monster of a plant with hardly any fruit because you told it to keep growing leaves when it was trying to make cucumbers. My grandfather fed his fruiting cucumbers with wood ash from the stove, and there's real wisdom in that. Wood ash is one of the richest simple sources of potassium a farm ever had, free from the fire that heated the house. A light scattering, maybe a small handful, worked gently into the soil around each plant, not touching the stem, once when the flowers start and maybe once more a month later. But go easy, because wood ash also raises the soil's alkalinity, and too much throws things off. So a light hand is the whole secret. If you don't burn wood, a scoop of plain compost does much the same quieter work, feeding a little of everything as it breaks down. The point is this: stop feeding your fruiting plant like it's still trying to grow. Feed it like it's trying to make cucumbers, because that's what it's doing. And here's where I want you to understand the size of what's really going on, because it's bigger than any one bottle or bag. Walk into any big garden store in the spring and count the products aimed at your vegetable garden. There's a fertilizer for planting, a different one for growing, a bloom booster, a fruit set spray, a magnesium supplement, an anti-mildew treatment, a soil conditioner, a special watering crystal. Dozens of bottles and bags, each one $12, $15, $20. Each one promising to be the missing piece. And a family can walk out having spent $60, $80, $100 to grow a few dollars worth of cucumbers. That's not an accident. That's a whole industry built on the idea that you cannot possibly grow food without buying their answers first. My people grew more food per acre and stored more of it through the winter than most modern gardens ever dream of. And we did it with clay pots and wood ash and Epsom salt and milk and our own two hands and the plain knowledge handed down at the kitchen table. Not because we couldn't afford the bottles, because we never needed them and we knew it. Now I've saved the best for last, the way my grandfather always did, because this is the one that made the neighbors' jaws drop when they saw our cucumber patch. And it's so simple, you'll wonder why nobody ever told you. It's about how the vine grows and how you can double the number of cucumbers just by changing where the plant puts its energy. I told you a cucumber vine makes male flowers first and female flowers, the fruit makers, a little later. Here's what almost nobody knows. On most common cucumber varieties, the main stem, the first long vine that shoots up, is heavily loaded with male flowers, especially down low. It's the side branches, the little arms that shoot out from the main stem, that carry far more of the female flowers, the ones that actually become cucumbers. So a plant that grows as one long single vine, which is what most folks let happen, is spending most of its strength on the stem that makes the fewest cucumbers. It's working hard in the wrong direction. The old method, the one my grandfather used and the one the market growers rediscovered and now guard closely, is to pinch out the growing tip of the main stem once the plant has climbed to a good height, somewhere around 4 or 5 feet, or once it's put out its first several leaves. If you're growing it low, you just nip off the very tip of that main leader with your fingernails. It feels like a mistake, cutting off the top of a healthy vine, and everything in you says don't. But the moment you take that tip, the plant stops pouring its strength up and out, and instead it sends out a burst of side branches, those very branches that carry the female flowers. More branches means more female flowers, means more cucumbers, and it happens fast. One study of vine crops found that this kind of tip pinching to force side branching increased the number of fruit-bearing shoots dramatically compared to a plant left to run as a single vine. My grandfather didn't need a study. He'd been pinching those tips his whole life, and his baskets told the story. Do it on a dry morning so the little wound heals clean, pinch the main tip, and then as the side branches grow, you can pinch their tips too after they've set a few cucumbers to keep the plant compact and productive instead of running wild all over the yard. What you end up with is a shorter, bushier plant that is absolutely loaded, its energy spent on fruit instead of on chasing more empty vine. This is the difference between a plant that gives you a few cucumbers off the end of a long, lonely stem and a plant so heavy with fruit you have to hunt to find them all. It costs nothing. It takes 1 minute, and not one store on earth will ever tell you to do it because there's no product in it for them. There's only cucumbers in it for you. Put it all together now and see what you've got. Steady water from a buried clay pot that costs $1. Green leaves fed by a spoonful of Epsom salt. Empty flowers turned to fruit by 2 minutes of hand-pollination on a still morning. A stalled vine tricked back to life by stripping off that one fat cucumber. Mildew held off with a splash of milk. The soil kept cool under free straw. The plant fed potassium when it turns to fruiting, not nitrogen. And the whole vine reshaped by one pinch of the main tip to throw its strength into the branches that make the cucumbers. Not a single bottle among them. Not one thing my grandfather couldn't have found on the farm 100 years ago. And a harvest that'll have you giving cucumbers away over the fence to the neighbors because you simply cannot eat them all. That's the thing they quietly took from you. All those years of walking the store aisles feeling like you needed to buy your way to a good garden, you never did. The knowledge was always there, plain and free, passed hand to hand at kitchen tables like mine, and somewhere along the way the outside world let it slip so somebody could sell it back to them in a bottle. You just took it back. You're one of the folks who won't keep overpaying for what the good soil and the old ways were always ready to give you for nothing, and there's a quiet dignity in that my grandfather would have nodded at. Now, do that one thing I asked at the start, and tell me down in the comments what state or growing zone you're gardening in, because I read them, and the timing of that midsummer pinch and that first pollination shifts a good bit from the south to the north, and I'll answer where I can. Don't just think it, type it, because somebody in your same corner of the country is going to read your comment and learn something from it. And if you'd like to keep learning the plain way, the way that trusts your own two hands over a store shelf, come along with us, because this isn't a channel so much as a lot of us remembering together what was never supposed to be forgotten. Next time, I'm going to show you the old way we kept those cucumbers crisp and crunching in the jar all winter long, and the one common mistake that turns a whole batch of pickles soft and hollow overnight. You'll want to know that one before your first big harvest comes in. I hope you can put that clay pot to work in your garden this summer. If you'd like to stay with me, I keep going inside the Amish field circle. That Ola? In there, I walk you through the whole season, right from where we left off. Ask me your own questions, and I answer you myself. You'll belong among thousands of old ways growers just like you. Point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel anytime. One click. If this helped your cucumbers, there's plenty more where that came from, right here on the channel. Go ahead and subscribe, and take a look around. I've got more simple garden tips waiting for you.